Hi, everyone, and welcome to English for You. I'm Erin.
And this is Rainbow.
And today we are talking about not a great thing, a bad sort of disaster that happened quite a few years ago now in 1949. But before we get into that, I want to talk about some famous boat disasters that have happened in the world that we might know about. One of them, obviously, is the very most famous one, the sinking of the Titanic. So this large boat was taking its first trip across the Atlantic Ocean in 1912.
Yeah, it was 1912.
Yeah, and it hit an iceberg, and it took 2 hours to sink, and of all of the people on the ship, only 710 people survived. So
wow.
there were almost 2,500, something like that, 22 or 2,500 people on it. So a lot of people, it was a big disaster. It was really famous. And I think one of the reasons it was so famous was because it had so many wealthy people on it, actually. It was supposed to be this very luxurious ship for the time, and a lot of very rich people were traveling to America on it. So quite a famous story, but...
And a famous movie.
And a famous movie, yes. You probably may have at this point seen this movie, though it is... almost 20 years old now at this point.
It's a classic, though.
All right. Well, that is one of the world's most famous boat disasters. But today, let's get started on the one that we're going to talk about in our article.
Reading.
Remembering the victims of the Taiping. On January 27, 1949, a Chinese steamer full of passengers trying to escape communist rule left Shanghai. The boat, Taiping, was bound for Taiwan. Its passengers wanted to move to the country in hopes of having better lives there. However, the ship never made it to the nation's shores. The boat was meant to carry only about 500 passengers, but 1,000 to 1,500 passengers were aboard. What's worse, the Taiping turned off its lights at night in order to dodge restrictions on sailing after 6 p.m., preventing other ships from seeing it. Together, these factors created the perfect storm. At 11:25 p.m., the Chenyuan, a smaller Taiwanese cargo ship, crashed into the Taiping near the Zhoushan archipelago. The Chenyuan sank immediately, followed by the Taiping within 45 minutes. Local fishermen and passing steamers saved only 39 people who were aboard the two ships. The names of many victims weren't recorded, and sadly, most of the bodies were never found.
All right, so our article starts out by giving us the basic information of what's happening here. It says, on January 27th, 1949, a Chinese steamer full of passengers trying to escape communist rule left Shanghai. All right, so we've got this steamer, which is another word for a boat, really. It's leaving Shanghai or China, and it's full of people trying to escape communist rule. Now, communist is an adjective here, and it describes the political system communism. Communism is when the government controls all goods and food production, and when the public can't have privately owned property. So what we're saying here is that everything is sort of shared with one another, and the government controls it.
And that was the dominant government in China for a long time, right?
I think it still is, actually.
Yeah, the Red Party, the Communist Party. All right, so the next part says the boat Taiping was bound for Taiwan. So we have the phrase here, was bound for, which means it's going or intending to go or on the way to somewhere. And this can be used to describe an unavoidable action. So if I say it's bound for disaster, means we couldn't save the Titanic anymore because it is going to sink. Now, I have some other sentences that have the phrase be bound for, and we can also use be bound to. So I could say she was on a plane bound for Moscow when she got sick. Or you can say she's bound for stardom. She was determined to be a star, and one day we knew that she was going to be famous.
All right, so this Taiping steamer, this ship, was on its way away from China and going towards Taiwan. And here's kind of why this was happening. It says its passengers wanted to move to the country, that's Taiwan, in hopes of having better lives there. So these people didn't want to live in a communist country. So they didn't really agree with this political system, and they thought they would have better lives in Taiwan. And it says in hopes of doing something. So in hopes of having a better life. Now, this phrase, in hopes of doing something, is used to show that someone hopes or wishes or wants to do something. So here, the people on the ship wanted to escape China for a better life somewhere else. Here's another example. Tanya applied for the job in hopes of becoming an editor at the fashion magazine.
Oh, I hope she makes it. All right, so the article continues to say, however, the ship never made it to the nation's shores. So they failed. So let's see what it says. It says, made it to. So this phrase means to be able to be present at a particular event. So the ship never made it. That means it never arrived. Maybe there was an accident or something happened. So we can also say if we couldn't make an engagement or a date or a plan with somebody, I could say, oh, Erin, I'm so sorry. I can't make it next Friday, so we'll have to postpone our hangout.
All right, so the boat did not make it. It did not reach Taiwan. Okay, so here's what was happening on the ship. It says the boat was meant to carry only about 500 passengers, but 1,000 to 1,500 passengers were aboard.
Too many.
Okay, so the boat's only supposed to have 500, but there's at least double that, and maybe even 3 times as many passengers on it than there should be. And we used the preposition to say where they were. We said they were aboard. So this preposition aboard is used to show that someone is on or moving onto a ship, an airplane, a bus, or a train. Here's another example. The train left as soon as all the passengers were aboard.
All right, so this is not going to happen. They're not going to make it. And the article says, what's worse, the Taiping turned off its lights at night in order to dodge restrictions on sailing after 6 p.m., preventing other ships from seeing it. So this sentence has a couple of parts to it.
Right.
First, we have the verb dodge. So dodge means to avoid. So when we use the word, we talk about avoiding somebody or something by a quick movement. So you might have heard dodgeball, which is a game that you throw a ball and other team tries to hide, and so they don't get hit by the ball. But in this case, it means that the Taiping avoided the sailing restrictions by turning off its lights so the officials wouldn't know it was sailing after 6 o'clock. So they basically dodged the restrictions. Now, we can also use the phrase, I dodged a bullet, to describe avoiding a very serious problem. So you could say, I just found out that my ex-boyfriend has a baby and I didn't know about it. I'm so glad that I dodged that bullet.
Okay, so let's find out what they were trying to dodge here or trying to avoid. So they were trying to avoid restrictions. Now, a restriction is a rule or a law that limits or controls what someone can do. So for instance, on the road, you might see a number that tells you how fast you can drive. So if it says 50, then you are restricted, that's a verb form, restrict, to driving 50 kilometers per hour. The government puts restrictions on speeding limits to keep people safe. So if it says 50 and you go over 50, you'll get in trouble because you've broken this restriction or done something the government says you shouldn't be doing.
Right, and another way that we can place a restriction on somebody is we can use the phrase to stop, keep, or prevent someone from doing something. And that means to stop something from happening or to stop somebody from doing something. So, for example, you could say, her mother stopped her from leaving the house that evening. Or you could say a block in the pipe prevented the water from coming through. Or she was really worried and those worries kept her from sleeping properly. So basically stopped from, prevented from, or kept from can be used interchangeably.
That's right. Okay, so we've got so many people on this boat, too many people, in fact, and the boat is sailing with its lights off. Now, it's doing that so that other people won't see it, but that can be a problem in another way, and that's why the next sentence says, together, these factors created the perfect storm. Now, a factor is a piece of information or an event that will affect or influence a decision or situation. Now, one of several things that can influence something or cause something to happen is a factor. So here, the factors that caused this ship to sink included too many people being on the boat and the boat not using its lights. These were two important parts of why this sort of disaster happened. Here's another example sentence. Before you decide to study abroad, consider all the factors. Think about how much it will cost, if you can speak that country's language, and if you will be able to live away from your family so long. So in that sentence, I listed 3 factors that you should think about for one decision.
All right, so we have the phrase, the perfect storm, and let's go check out Pocket Phrase Go for another way to use this phrase.
Pocket Phrase Go! I'll be honest with you. I'm in big trouble. 身为美国总统川普，难免会有人眼红，随时都有人想搞垮我。The news is against me while I'm being investigated by the FBI. It's a perfect storm. 现在我根本就在暴风眼里面。Perfect storm 就是会造成各种灾害的完美风暴。Let me tell you, when it's 形容一件事情的时候，就是糟到不可以再糟的局面。说到这个，现在我们的国家也在 perfect storm 里面。The country is now experiencing a perfect storm. Russia and North Korea are sending hackers, and China is targeting us. 不过我承诺 Make America Great Again. 我会给大家一个交代，让世界再次敬畏我们伟大的国家。我们也有优秀的内阁来帮我们做这件事情 OK? They are super smart people, very smart, and I promise we will make America great again.
All right, here's what happened after this ship was sailing. It was actually sailing near Taiwan, but something bad happened. It says, at 11:25 p.m., the Jianyuan, a smaller Taiwanese cargo ship, crashed into the Taiping near the Zhoushan archipelago. Now, a cargo ship is actually a very large ship that carries goods around the world or to different countries in large containers. Cargo ships do not usually carry people. They are usually only used for goods. Okay, so this is a smaller sort of cargo ship. So it might not go all the way to the US, but it might go to Japan or the Philippines or something. And it didn't see the Taiping because the Taiping had its lights off. And so what happened is it crashed.
All right, and the word crash is a verb. Now, we usually talk about a vehicle or a boat crashing, which means colliding or bumping into each other very violently, or sometimes it could run into an obstacle or another vehicle. So two cars crashing together, we call this a car crash. And we can also have a plane crash, which could be a plane crashing into the building, such as on 911 in America. So if a vehicle crashes or somebody crashes it, it's usually involved in an accident that's quite serious, and somebody could potentially be hurt. So an example is, I crashed my bicycle into a tree when I was trying to look at my cell phone. Wow. So I got to be really careful when I'm looking at my cell phone, or just don't look at it while I'm riding my bike.
All right. Well, we do know also crash can be used as a noun to just sort of describe what happens when you crash, right?
Right.
And as an example of that, we could say his elder son was killed in a car crash a few years ago. That's the usage of the noun. Now, we said that this crash happened near the Zhoushan archipelago. Just so you guys know, an archipelago is just a group of small islands, kind of all in the same area.
Oh, they have those in Japan, right?
Yeah.
There's a bunch of small islands. All right, and the next sentence says, the Jianyuan sank immediately, followed by the Taiping within 45 minutes. So we have the verb sank here, and that's the past tense of the word sink. Now, sink means to go down below the surface of something. Usually, we're talking about a body of water like the ocean. So if the boat sinks or somebody sinks, it means it disappears and below the water. And usually, there's an accident, so people lose their lives. So when we're talking about fighting in the Navy battle, the goal is to sink the enemy's ship or to make it go down, and usually killing everybody in it. Now, we mentioned before, what do we talk about when we say sinking ship? We think about the Titanic, which took down a bunch of people in it. All right, so I have another example. It says, even the smallest leak can sink a great ship, which was what started out in the Titanic. And then it ran into a big iceberg.
All right. Well, we saw that first the Jianyuan sank, but then we saw the phrase followed by the Taiping. Now, when we use this phrase, be followed by something, it means when one thing is followed by another thing, one thing happens right after the other. Okay, so first one thing happens, and then another thing happens, and the second thing follows the first thing. So, for example, we could say, Frank will give his speech first, followed by Catherine. So, first to speak will be Frank, second will be Catherine.
All right, and the next sentence says, local fishermen and passing steamers saved only 39 people who were aboard the two ships. Oh, so that's not a lot of people saved, considering there was more than 1,000.
Right, of course. So, we saw that there were maybe even 1,500 people on that boat. And, of course, all of the people on the cargo ship. But out of all those people, only 39 people were saved. Now, luckily, there were some boats kind of in the area to save those 39 people. But, of course, we have the rest. And it says here, the names of many victims weren't recorded. And sadly, most of the bodies were never found.
Oh, that is very sad.
All right. So let's find out what we're talking about here when we say victim. Victim is a noun, and it's someone who has suffered or died because of a bad situation, such as an accident or disaster, or because a crime was committed against them. So for example, someone who is hurt or dies in a car accident, we would call them a victim. Or someone who even just has a bad illness or a disease, we could say they are a victim of this disease. And of course, we mentioned crime. Someone can be a victim of a robbery or another crime like that. Here's an example sentence. This group raises money for the victims of typhoons and earthquakes. These are victims we might see in Taiwan quite often. We have a lot of earthquakes here. We have a lot of typhoons in the summer and fall. And, people can get hurt or even die from these things. And we would call these people victims.
All right, so that's it for today's part of the article. And let's go on to our For You chat.
Great.
For You chat.
All right, welcome to our For You chat. Today's question is, what other accidents at sea can you think of? And Aaron, what do you know about them?
Well, accidents at sea are relatively common.
Yeah, very common.
Hear about them quite a bit. I was actually looking online for some information just sort of to talk about for this article, and I learned about one that was actually the worst sea disaster or worst boat disaster in recorded history. And that was a boat called the Doña Paz. I'm probably not saying that. It's right. It's a Spanish name, but it was a Philippine ferry that crashed into another ship in 1987. But what happened was the life jackets on the ferry were actually locked up, and so people couldn't get to them. And then the ship caught fire, so people just had to jump into the water without them. But I was reading about it, and it was actually so serious that they jumped into the water without their life jackets, but the water as well as the ship was on fire, and there were also sharks in the water. So it was basically everyone's worst nightmare. It was all of these things. And you know what? It says on the internet that almost 4,375 people died in the disaster, which was crazy.
Wow, that's super, super serious.
All right. Well, do you know of any? Can you think of any?
Honestly, the Titanic is probably the one that represents the most.
Right.
And I think nowadays with modern technology and people monitoring the ships, we're a lot safer. And hopefully nothing too terrible will happen to a bunch of people.
Right. Well, of course, disasters at sea do still happen. We have all of these oil rigs that might catch fire or spill oil into the ocean. And, ferries in some countries can still be quite dangerous because they might have too many people on them, or maybe someone isn't paying attention. So there are actually lots of things that you guys can talk about. You guys can go look some up and then talk about them with your friends. But we have to say goodbye for today. So we'll see you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Remembering the victims of the Taiping. On January 27, 1949, a Chinese steamer full of passengers trying to escape communist rule left Shanghai. The boat, Taiping, was bound for Taiwan. Its passengers wanted to move to the country in hopes of having better lives there. However, the ship never made it to the nation's shores. The boat was meant to carry only about 500 passengers, but 1,000 to 1,500 passengers were aboard. What's worse, the Taiping turned off its lights at night in order to dodge restrictions on sailing after 6 p.m., preventing other ships from seeing it. Together, these factors created the perfect storm. At 11:25 p.m., the Chenyuan, a smaller Taiwanese cargo ship, crashed into the Taiping near the Zhoushan archipelago. The Chenyuan sank immediately, followed by the Taiping within 45 minutes. Local fishermen and passing steamers saved only 39 people who were aboard the two ships. The names of many victims weren't recorded, and sadly, most of the bodies were never found.
Vocabulary Review.
Aboard. There are 3,512 people aboard this ship as it sails to Jamaica and the Bahamas. Dodge. Jeff dodged having to wash the dishes by telling his mother he had too much homework. Factor. One of the factors that helped us decide which car to buy was the price. Crash. Oliver crashed his car into a tree, but he wasn't hurt. Sink. I dropped a stone off the side of the boat, and it sank to the bottom of the lake. Victim. Sam was the victim of the fire accident and was in the hospital for a month.